Tonight, we'll be looking ahead to the future of the show, giving you sort of a preview of coming attractions and talking about sort of all of our hopes and dreams as we draw close to our first year here on the Atheist Experience Network. Phone lines are already open. If you have any questions, sexy or serious, or want to talk about what you'd like to see or what you'd like to hope for the next year of the show, give us a call at 512-686-0279. V, what are you most looking forward to this year?
I am looking forward to the Bat Cruise that's happening.
Yeah, coming up September 21st. Get your tickets now. There's going to be a free lecture with Dave Warnock and others being lined up. And then we have our huge Bat Cruise. Those tickets are just $30 at bit.ly/Bat Cruise. Definitely a good time and worth checking out. You're going to be there?
I'm totally going to be there.
Absolutely. It's kind of the only time in the year that everybody from within the ACA, everybody who is out of town, everybody who is interested, all the friends, and everybody who just makes this place work, can actually get together and meet each other IRL, without the avatars and the chat links and everything else.
I'm excited. It's going to be my first year doing it, so I'm super excited to network and meet a bunch of folks.
So it's absolutely a good time. We also have some incredibly exciting shows coming up this September. What are you looking forward to?
Well, September 5th, we've got Dr. Daryl Ray coming back on talking about pseudoscience, and he's going to be walking us through a version of his Reclaiming Your Sexuality workshop that's going to be premiering at the Recovering from Religion Fall Excursion. So we're going to get a sneak peek of that. Yeah,
Recovery from Religion, a fascinating organization. I know a lot of folks watching right now have been really helped by the types of services that they offer, and this is sort of their big intensive. So excited to hear just a small preview, the stuff that they're going to be doing. Following that, on September 12th, we've got Dr. Eric Sprankle. I guarantee, even if you have no idea who that is, if you are on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, you've seen his tweets. And I know that that's a little crazy to say. He's very successful on Twitter as Dr. Sprankle. He is a associate professor at Minnesota State University, is in the clinical psychology department and studies sexuality. But his tweets about sex and social justice and just some of the craziness in our culture have really caught on like wildfire. So it'll be very exciting to have a conversation with him, and we hope that you'll join us for that. And then we're coming up on the week of our Bat Cruise.
Yeah, the week of the Bat Cruise. As we said, Dave Warnock is going to be back, and with him is going to be Marie Delafont, who was on Secular Sexuality a couple weeks ago. So she's going to be back, and we're going to be having Ladies' Night with her, and Mandisa Thomas going to be calling in. Or is she going to be here?
No, yeah, she'll be joining us online, actually.
Okay,
Unfortunately,
perfect.
not able to make it to the Bat Cruise.
Okay, well, we're going to have a fun conversation among us girls. We're going to kick you out of the studio.
Yeah, you know what? I've been doing this for the last year, and my feet hurt. So happy to cede my mic and let the ladies have a night with it. But not before we get back on September 26th with Dr. Susie Block. If you watched HBO after midnight at any point in the 80s or 90s, you're likely familiar with Dr. Susie. Her book, The Bonobo Way, has been an incredibly fascinating journey for me over the past couple of months as I've been going through that and talking about it with clients. And we're going to be just talking with her about, again, how to unleash our sexuality and make these different parts of ourselves more open. So really excited about some of the big names we have coming through and all the things we have lined up. After that, in October, we've got Dr. David Lay, a name that I've referenced on this show many, many times. So very excited to meet a couple of my heroes. So thank you all so much for making that possible, for joining us and allowing us to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and, in addition to all of those folks, we're always looking for interesting people to have on air. We'd love to hear from you, the types of things that you'd like to see, or if you yourself or someone you know has a unique or interesting perspective on sexuality or how our sexuality is affected by this sort of Judeo-Christian culture that we're all swimming in. We'd love to hear from you. In the past, we've had folks like nurses and burlesque performers and phone sex operators. I mean, doctors, lawyers, business executives, the whole gambit. And so if you or anybody else you know is a model or performer, a Hooters waitress, or a pageant contestant, dungeon master, any of that great kind of stuff, we would love to hear from you. Shoot us an email. That's sex@atheist-community.org. We would love to hear from you about the show and about what kinds of things you'd like to see moving forward. You know, we try to think of this show as offering normalization, education, and entertainment on sexual topics through a lens of skeptical and positive atheism. And we would love to hear what that means to you and what we can be doing to make this an interesting and fun place to be every Thursday night. So thank you to everybody who's joining us. Again, we'd love to hear from you. We're at 512-686-0279, 512-686-0279.
Awesome. So I guess today we're just going to kind of have a conversation and reintroduce ourselves as we enter this new secular millennia.
Yeah, kind of stepping into the next phase. There's just so much to be excited about, but I think it's a good moment to kind of, I guess, look back at maybe the roots of, of what we've accomplished in the past year and to get excited about where we'd like to go and what we want all of this to mean and to look like moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll start by maybe asking you a couple questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So I'm going to pretend I don't know you for a minute. Hello there.
Howdy. Thanks so much for joining me, for joining the show and just being a part of what we're doing here.
So I guess you bring the sexuality and sex education aspect to the show.
Yeah, I do. I bring the sexy to the show. Woo. Yeah.
So how do you see the intersection of kind of applied skepticism to what you bring to both your clients and your work outside of the show and also to listeners on the show? How does that kind of interact with the therapy that you do?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's impossible to talk about sexuality without also talking about religion and culture and all, because all of these things are unfortunately inextricably linked. So regardless of whether the person who's coming into my therapy office, the person who's watching this show has been an atheist their whole lives, has, not a whole lot of feelings or a lot of trauma about religion, the reality is that it's affecting all of us. And so there's a lot to tackle there, and it's definitely something to take very seriously.
Right. No, that makes sense. I know that a lot of clients and probably a lot of listeners as well kind of tend to approach sexuality and concepts like love and pleasure from a kind of woo perspective, or a perspective that maybe isn't hinged on logic and science, because those kind of seem like antonyms sometimes.
Sure.
So I guess how do you engage with those clients or those listeners, those people who kind of need that perspective in order to kind of get the concepts?
Yeah, and we are working in this field. I mean, you and I as educators, myself as a therapist, we're talking about humans and humanity, and aside from height and weight and cholesterol counts, there's not a lot of good metrics, particularly when we're talking about sexuality and love and these really unmeasurable things. So, it's about kind of meeting people where they are. That's a big part of it. And providing a little bit of education where appropriate, giving people an opportunity to maybe develop that vocabulary, to step away from sort of these beliefs. A lot of times these beliefs have never been challenged. They're just assumptions that people stick with because they think that that's the way it has to be, because that's the way it's always been.
Right.
So it really does mean a lot of just sort of recognizing that when people use these sort of magical terms and they're talking about their soulmates and they're talking about, loving somebody with all their heart, and they don't necessarily challenge these assumptions because they're so built into our worldview. So even just letting somebody know that, hey, you don't have one soulmate.
Right,
There's no empirical data to support the notion that there are 7 billion people on the planet and 3 billion of them are meant to partner up with another 3 billion, and then some people just get left out, and that's how. There's no reason to believe that. And yet that's sort of the ridiculous myth that so many of us carry secretly inside of us.
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, the way you talk about things matters. So even if you don't, even if you've never sat down and formulated a theory about soulmates, if that's the term you've heard your whole life, you're going to, like, I don't know.
Yeah, and when you describe it in that absurd way, that there's no reason to think that 3 billion people would end up with three, when you put it in those terms, people are, of course, like, well, of course I don't believe that. But you have to actually say those words.
Right, okay, then how would it work?
Yeah, to sort of start that pattern. And so there's a lot of that. And then there's a lot of sort of acceptance, not letting the perfect become the enemy of the good. Giving people an opportunity to take their own journeys and sort of grow on their own, to reach things at their own pace, and to just facilitate that, recognizing that as much as I like to rely on the empirical research, the well-defined data, the evidence-based and supported therapies, the reality is there's a lot of shooting from the hip. That's sort of the nature of the world, and no matter how much of an expert I struggle or strive to be, and how much I look up to, many of the experts we have on this show, many of the experts that I know in my real life, they're all making it up as they go along too, to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. A lot of the you can make a lot of progress with somebody without being so nitpicky that you tear down every time they use an esoteric word.
Exactly, yeah.
So you need to pick your battles, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And I do respect other people's beliefs, because I know that as much as I may have studied this and may be like the expert in the room, maybe not in mushrooms, but at least in the therapy room, I usually know more about sexuality and these different ideas. But even then, I don't know everything, and I certainly don't pretend to. And so when somebody comes in, whether I am working with a client who does have a faith background, or, I've made it very clear on this show, we've talked a good number of times about sex addiction as a concept, and how deeply flawed and yet pervasive that idea is in my field. And so if I have a client who comes in claiming to be a sex addict, I'm not going to, take a research paper and rub their nose in it or roll it up and hit them like a new dog in a newspaper.
Right.
I'm happy to meet people where they're at and happy to accept what they believe. If they come in and all they want to talk about is their relationship with their parents, and they casually mention that they, believe homosexuality is a sin, for instance, there are certain things that I am willing to challenge as we develop a relationship, and I want to
make a note of that. And
go
back later.
Little bit, some of the time. I mean, certainly there are lines too far. There are places I'm not willing to go with a client, and things I'm not willing to just take at face value. And you see that on this show. I'm willing to let people kind of bring in some ridiculousness on some calls and push back only as I feel like they're able to hear it.
Yeah. So speaking of previous calls that you've had,
sure.
What are some of the calls, or maybe some of the common denominators between calls that you found have been the most challenging? So when someone calls in with a certain type of question, what kind of question have you gotten the most that you've had to really just kind of hammer away at it?
Yeah. So the nature of this show, I mean, we're a YouTube channel. We are not a government health organization. We are not a hospital. There are just inherent limitations to what we do, and that's not to say that we can't do meaningful work, that people aren't having their lives affected by programs like this. I know my personal life was dramatically changed by, in particular, the Savage Love Cast, which we've kind of referenced a couple times on this show, and a number of other great podcasts and programs. And, I aspire to be at all in that vein. And so I do feel like there's meaningful work to be done. But every once in a while we will get a call from somebody who says, I'm having trouble finding a girlfriend. And you're like, okay, we can talk about that. And then it very quickly becomes apparent that this is somebody who's struggling with incredible depression, incredible feelings of loneliness, struggles with social skills, struggles with holding down a job, and all of these different things. And, talking about how to write a pithy and clever Tinder message is not going to be the solution for that person.
Right, exactly.
And so those are the calls that break my heart a little bit, because as a therapist, as a human being, those are the people that I want to take out for a hamburger and just talk about their life and see what we can do, but certainly not the type of thing that is going to make for educational, entertaining programming, and certainly not the type of thing that we're going to be able to change or fix in a meaningful way over the course of a phone call.
Right. Do you find that there's anything that people in your fields in general do that could maybe be benefited by a tactic that maybe we've adopted on the show or that you adopt in your practice?
Yeah, honestly, whether it's this show or another one like it, I just wish that every therapist out there was listening to something about sex, because the truth is, like in many human service fields, whether we're talking about, even your gynecologist, your general practitioner, your psychiatrist, your therapist, your social worker, very few of these people are getting significant, comprehensive, meaningful sex education. The reality is many of them may not have gone beyond, rolling a condom over a banana in their high school health class. And because I live in Texas, I know that it's super possible to graduate high school without I've never done that. So I just wish that people would do anything, really just to start with, even if you're a generalist, even if you don't work specifically or particularly with the queer community, for instance, or on sexual issues, on issues of out-of-control sexual behavior, even if that's not what you're doing, even if you are mostly prescribing, cholesterol medication as a general practitioner, and that's largely what you do, I would hope that people would begin to develop some specific understandings of the struggles that the queer community faces and those issues that are really directly connected to our sexuality.
Mm-hmm. I would even go so far as to say, I as a queer person, I understand that there are things that are specifically to do with the queer community, but I would even say, don't even make that distinction. Just include it all. It's this is just sex. It's not straight sex versus queer sex. It's just, this is.
Well, and that's a notion that we aspire to in the abstract. But the reality is so much of our culture is built around these heteronormative, monogamous ideas.
Really?
Shocker. If you're watching a program like this, I have to imagine that there's something drawing you in, because the reality is that sex looks kind of one way in most people's minds, and that's not the way it actually looks for most people, or at least many people. And so while I'd like to think that a gay man and a gay woman and a straight man and these different folks would be able to go into a doctor and not have to have that aspect of their lives be relevant to their cholesterol or whatever else, the simple fact is that all providers, all human beings really, need to be cognizant of the particular struggles that are being faced by certain populations. And if you're queer in America right now, I'm excited that you have it better than you did 10 years ago, and certainly better than in the 80s. And, every 50 years on aggregate, things are very much moving in the right direction. And I think that's something to celebrate and be excited about. But I am not about to rest on our laurels or pretend that the job is done.
Oh, for sure. And I think that that's a really good thing that this show kind of offers is that reminder that we're not done yet. We're making progress and we're getting there, but it's slow going. And we do have to continue to have these conversations, even if sometimes we answer the same questions a couple of times, a couple of different ways. Every single call and every single question is helping move us forward.
That's certainly the notion. The Emancipation Proclamation did not ipso facto end slavery. I mean, there's certainly much more to it than that. Giving women the vote didn't make sexism just disappear and all of a sudden all women are completely equal to men. We fixed it. We can go home. That's just not the reality. You know, we can be excited about movements towards the curing of AIDS and things like Truvada, things like the Obergefell decision, the ending of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We can point and highlight all of these successes and be very excited about it. But that doesn't mean that trans folks aren't still getting kicked out of the military, getting beaten on a regular basis. That, that lesbians are struggling to find acceptance for their relationships or for their sexuality. I mean, I could go on in so many ways. And so, yeah, the hope of a show like this is to, I guess, to just continue to move that needle, you know, to be pushing the envelope in some ways, while also just sort of taking a moment to bask in and celebrate all of this sexual freedom that I think so many of us have been deprived for so much of our lives. And that's true of I think, everybody watching. Certainly individual stories may differ, but whether you are gay, straight, trans, NB, I mean, all of these different descriptors or labels, there are systems of oppression found in religion and in our society and in our culture that are in many ways starting to crumble. And that's something to be excited about.